From Guidepost Solutions. I led the investigative team, which you see up here with me. We're looking forward to your questions. I'll take them first. To the extent I need some help from my colleagues because they focused on a particular area, I'll call on them to help, but you can direct your questions to me. When you come up to Mike, ask whatever you like. If you could state your name, that would be great. That's up to you. But whenever anybody's ready, just walk up to the podium. And as soon as someone's done, we can keep rotating through, and we'll take as many questions as we can. So if anybody wants to be first, feel free.
My name is Renee Upham. I was a teacher in Oxford on November 30th at the middle school. My son was an 11th grader at that time. I want to start by saying thank you for the report. Truly, thank you. Waiting 2 years to find out how our children were put in harm's way is a disgrace I put on this school district. Any healing that could have taken place was made impossible by not getting the facts. So that's why I'm truly thankful to have these facts now. I have two questions. One, I don't think you're going to answer, but we'll give it a try. I know schools have legal immunity from prosecution, except in cases of gross negligence. I know this because immediately after the shooting, the school district called staff into a meeting run by their lawyers who told us these lawsuits have no chance. How they knew that before the facts came out, I don't know. But my question was, with all the expertise up here, if you believe this report shows gross negligence.
Thanks for the question. Our scope of work was to look at the district, their actions before the shooting, during the shooting, what went right, what went wrong, if anything, and that's what we covered in the report. The question you're asking is a legal standard, and we're not here to address the legal standard. For us, it was you have certain policies and guidelines are not in place, and the question is, did you follow those policies and guidelines, which are mandatory for the district, if that's what you adopt? And you put out to the district that these were your policies, then for us was, did you follow it? What did you do? Did you do something like these policies or these guidelines? We have a prosecutor that's looking at criminal standards. We have the lawsuits I know that are out there looking at, I think, the standard you're asking about, so I can't answer that question.
Okay. My second one is, can you tell me if this school board made your job, which was to find the facts, if the school board made that job easier or more difficult?
The school board has cooperated with us from the beginning. Anything that we asked for in terms of documents, we would get over time. There's a lot of documents. We looked at, I think, tens of thousands of documents in this case because we wanted to get it right. Every school board president was cooperative with us since we started. Whatever we asked for, we got. We had the issue of witnesses that wouldn't talk to us, and so we asked for help in that area, and over time we got more and more witnesses to talk. But at the end of the day, the question came earlier, how many did we get? And I forget what the numbers were, 70 out of 160 or something like that, approximately. So we didn't, there were a lot of witnesses that didn't talk, and we got different reasons for that. Trauma for some didn't want to get the district in trouble, some didn't want to get their friends in trouble. There were various reasons that are in our report, from lawyers to unions to insurance companies. I mean, it was hard to get people to come forward, but we kept trying. We put it out in different publications. Please, if you have any information, we did that several times. Anybody, we'll talk to anybody. And we got a lot of people. We got a lot of people in the beginning, and then it kind of slowed down. There were critical witnesses we wanted to talk to, we couldn't get. So I think the board, for the most part, was very cooperative with what we're doing. They never obstructed us. They never stood in our way. Anything that we asked for.
Was the board aware they could have made participation contingent on employment?
Could the board made,
There was
yes.
some- yeah, so the board knew that.
We believe that, I believe that's the case, that they could have forced people to talk.
And they
But they
chose not
decided
to.
not to, but, why they did, that is not something I have.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I'll go next. So the number in your report of people who participated is less than 36%, less than 51 people. And what was the total number, like 140 some?
It was 70 out of 160, or 70 out of 130?
Your report says 51, the one I have on my screen. But how can you, like, I'm just curious from your perspective, you say that the board did not obstruct justice, but they didn't make it mandatory for all of their employees to cooperate with your investigation. How do you consider that not obstructing justice when we all in this community need to know who was involved at every level? All those details, how do you not see that as obstructing justice from the perspective of a community member?
I understand your question. For me, obstruction is, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're not allowed to do this, we're not going to give you this document, we're not going to make these people available to you that you're asking for. But I think that, to me, cooperation is not interfering with my investigation. Now, I understand, that you can interpret it that way, but we wanted people to talk to us. That's all I can say, and we
Yeah,
made that
we
clear.
did too, right.
Yeah, we made that clear, and people had different reasons for not talking, and we weren't able to judge those reasons. Was it real? Was it not real? Because there are people suffering from trauma. I don't have to tell the families that, especially the families that are here. But there were, we heard a lot of that. There's a lot of hurt going on. But again, I couldn't decide if this person who told me they didn't want to talk because of trauma was just didn't want to cooperate because they didn't want to get in trouble.
But in regards to the board, when you talked to them, was this a conversation you had? Because I don't remember in a public meeting where they ever discussed that, and the Open Meetings Act require them to they have to vote in public on this stuff. When did that happen?
So, from the start of the investigation, we were all about staying away from the board, not being involved. They didn't want to be involved in what we were doing, not only because they didn't want to interfere with our investigation, because there's an appearance thing. Like, you let us do what we're doing, and that was the way it was. But there came a point where, we needed to see if people were going to be forced to talk to us. And, I wasn't involved in who voted on what at the board level, and I can't get into open, closed board meeting stuff. That's a Michigan law.
But they have to vote publicly on everything they decide and discuss it in public. They can't make decisions in private.
I defer to the community on that. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Would you feel it would be appropriate for Governor Whitmer to order an investigation with her Attorney General to come in here and hold people accountable at a criminal level for their failure that caused 4 children to unnecessarily die?
I don't know what power the Michigan governor or the Michigan Attorney General or any other public agency has to force people to cooperate with their investigation. I don't know what that power is. My understanding is, just from my own research, is that outside of a prosecutor who has subpoena power in civil litigation where you have subpoena power, that's what you need to get people to talk. And even if you have that, you could have people taking the Fifth Amendment and not talking. So there's different roadblocks to getting what you're asking for, but I don't know what the power is of the Michigan governor or the Attorney General. But
who presses charges when there's gross negligence? I mean, when people die, who would typically say, hey, this person, they let it happen? Not one of them, but a whole group of them.
Again, I know you have prosecutors that deal with criminal matters. You have lawyers and courts and judges and juries.
So we need Karen McDonald to step up to the plate and issue some charges against the people that were in charge for our community, because we have dead people, but no accountability for the people who were there that day yet.
I hear what you're saying. I hope our report gives some accountability.
It does. Thank you for
People can take our report and do what they want with it, but we had a client. It was the board. They asked us to do a thorough, independent investigation. We did it. This is the results of our investigation, and people can use it how they see fit.
Okay. And you sent a representative to one of the board meetings, I think it was 2 months ago, and gave a report and an update on the current status of the investigation, and you reported to us that the school district hired a separate attorney to run interference for your investigation and actually was counseling people not to cooperate with the investigation. Like, that doesn't sound like a board that's really trying to find the truth. It sounds like somebody who's trying to hide a crime. I mean, I think we're dealing with criminals here.
You have a district that is in litigation. That district was
Civil.
assigned. Yeah. Was
No, I'm
assigned-
talking about criminal.
Criminal.
No, I'm saying we need criminal. The civil isn't, like, we have
Oh, you were
to,
asking about counsel, so I was trying to get at the lawyers that were involved were lawyers for the district in civil litigation. I don't know lawyers that are involved for the district in the criminal side of it. I'm not familiar with that.
well, I would love to see the prosecutors issue some charges against the people who failed to do their job that day that we entrusted our children to follow protocol, state law, mandatory reporting, all the things were really in place. There was enough in place, and they failed. And it wasn't one person, it was a whole group. And I'm so thankful that your report exposed this to the community for the people that did not already know this. It is a great help to us, and I hope this is just the beginning of accountability. And I hope every person in this community gets on the bandwagon to hold our board members and every person in administration on November 30th who didn't do their job accountable. And thank you for being here.
Anyone else have any questions?
Hi, Marissa Prince. I brought envelopes here for people who might want to write to the judge who haven't already. I'll leave them here. Anyone can write to the judge. Thank you for your report. I read it. I guess my question is an overall question still of why? So has Tim thrown, for example, there's a laundry list of things that the report says he didn't do that he should have done, and has he said why he wasn't doing those things?
We interviewed Tim Throne. He was fully cooperative with our investigation. We asked him a lot of questions. The results of our interview with him are reflected in the report. I think he was he deposed?
He was.
So he was one of the witnesses that actually was deposed and spoke to us. And so what he told us is reflected in our report.
Does it say in the report then why we weren't doing these things, or why he didn't have a person assigned who was solely responsible for these things, why this stuff wasn't happening? Did he give a reason?
I think their position is that they were doing things, and he expected that they were doing what the policy and any guidelines said. So that is why we got into the oversight piece. Well, what did you do to make sure that your buildings, your schools, the high school, that they were doing what you expected them to be doing pursuant to the district's policies and guidelines?
So his position is that he thought these forms were getting filled out and these threat assessments were getting done, and then getting filed away, and decisions were being made based on the answers that the students gave, and all these questions were being answered on a daily basis.
I think everybody's position throughout, from the board on down to the counselor and the dean, was that they were doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing.
But no one was doing it.
It's set forth in our report. We show you where the failures were.
They were doing the huddle-ups instead.
They were doing something called a huddle up, but as our report says, we didn't find that to be pursuant to their policy of how you do threat assessments, and that they didn't have the guidelines that come with the policy to tell you how to do your threat assessment. So at the building level, they decided, they came up with their own way of doing it, which was the behavioral flow chart and the huddle up,
Okay.
which they thought was doing threat assessments.
But if we take it all like a step back, like I'm trying to explain this to like my third grader who lost her babysitter, and I'm trying to say, here's why Hannah's gone. It's because these people being paid a lot of money didn't do what they were supposed to be doing, And is that because, do I tell her that's because they didn't know school shootings happened, and they didn't know how to figure out who might shoot up a school? They didn't know what to look for. They were busy doing other things. They were not real bright. They were looking forward to retirement. They preferred being comfortable. They preferred doing Alice drills to actually doing the real complicated, difficult, painful work of recognizing that we might have someone walking in our hallways capable of killing people and figuring out who that person might be. Because the Secret Service has laid all this out for us for decades of what to look for. I looked through their manuals. 41% of attacks occur the first week back after a break. Okay? I read through all those Secret Service manuals in 2 nights. Why was no one from Oxford Community Schools like reading this and absorbing it, and that was their job, and they were on top of this, man? And now these poor children and these poor families. And this was so important, and it wasn't being done. And I don't blame the staff necessarily, because you're just trying to do what you think you need to do. But so what is the reason? Why wasn't this being done? Like, what conclusion did you guys come to?
There's a policy on threat assessments. There was no policy on suicide. There were no guidelines, proper guidelines on threat assessment. There were guidelines on suicide. So there was this going on in terms of what the policies and the guidelines were. So that's in place. You have a superintendent's office that knows there's policies and guidelines out there and assumes they're being followed. So the question is, what is the oversight that's being done from the board to the super, to the principal in the high school, and from the principal down to the counselor and the dean? What is the oversight? And what we found, we assumed things were being done. We trusted that they were redone. We know these people, but the type of oversight that you're asking about, that's what we found lacking. But
So those are the types of things that happen when you, have people that are just too comfortable with one another. You have people who, I don't know. I don't know why people weren't doing it, why this wasn't happening.
You have hundreds of policies and guidelines. You have board members and superintendents that come and go into districts where things exist. And when they come in, it's already there. And then from time to time, these things are changed. So is everybody reading all of these policies? We found that not to be the case.
Okay.
Were these things being pushed down? We didn't find that to be the case. So people at the bottom were using what they thought they were supposed to be using, what they thought were best, even though that stuff was public. So you see, responsibility at all ends of this. It wasn't pushed down to you, but it was public.
It just seems like there was no all-encompassing, like, we're going to do these Alice drills on this schedule, and we're going to do them well, and we're going to, the kids are going to know what to do, and we're going to have these night locks, and we're going to lock this thing down if someone comes in. But this entire piece of who that someone might be and how we identify that someone was just like I don't know where it was. It wasn't happening. And I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to the families affected. The approach I've taken to this thing from the beginning, and it has been very uncomfortable for me personally, but it's worth it, is to put myself in the shoes of the families who have lost their children. And I'm disappointed that more people haven't been willing to do that and act in a way that you would want someone to act if it was your child who didn't come home that day. You would want this community up in arms fighting for you and your child. And it hasn't happened, and the people who have fought for it have been ridiculed by the community and ostracized. And we needed this report badly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess following that, the school was sorry, this is hard, but the school was performing these mental health evaluations every so often with like SABRE, for example. But it sounds like they weren't using the like the outcomes that came from it. So you know, you had kids that were flagged, like the shooter, he was flagged in the SABRE, but nobody was using that information to do anything. Is that what we have learned?
We laid out an extensive history for the shooter. We thought it was important for the community to see who he was from the moment he entered the district to the day of the shooting. So it's in our report. You should read it and see who this person was. But we did it because our job was to look at the threat assessment piece and the suicide assessment piece. And it's really to better understand whether there was anything from 4th grade through the shooting that could have played a role in the threat assessment. We didn't look at this to see if that turned this kid into a shooter.
No.
We looked at this to see if this information, this data that's out there, that schools have on all of these kids.
I feel like they're not using the data.
The question is, are they using it? How do they use it?
Yeah.
Would it have made a difference on the 30th when you have that math homework? Would any of the stuff that we're talking about from 4th grade to the day of the shooting, would any of that mattered when you had that math homework in front of all of these people and they made some decisions? We put that out there to see what was available and what wasn't. As it relates to SABREs, I don't know, Chris and maybe Gary, you want to talk about the SABREs piece, because there's a lot of, I think, there's some stuff that people I don't think understand with SABREs. There was things available, but who was available? Wasn't everybody? And did it get to everybody? Did they actually use the product the way it was supposed to be used because of the timing of the shooting and the timing of COVID? There was a lot going on there. We lay it out in the report, but Chris, you want to say anything about that?
Well, I think to your point is that, you know, as we state in the report, they had administered the 2 different types of SABRES assessments. It was difficult to get teacher participation in them. The teacher participation doing the evaluations of students was low. And at the time of November 30th, as you correctly point out, they had gathered the data, but they hadn't figured out a plan yet as to how to use the data. And that's what the state of play was on November 30th. And with respect to building level people, they didn't have access to SABRES data at that point. Like they hadn't been trained on it. They didn't have the credentials necessary to like log in and access that data. And that's, as we stated in the report, the data was sitting there waiting to be interpreted at that time.
Is it being interpreted now in our school system?
I believe so. I'm going to defer to folks who know
Yes.
that better than I do.
That's
Okay.
discussed in the initial Guidepost report.
Circling back to Tim Throne, I still, to me, or not just him, but to the administration, it sounds like they're saying, well, I thought that person was, okay, I'm going to pull that back. The idea that they were all comfortable with each other and they all knew each other and they all trusted each other, that kind of fails for me when you bring in EJAC because he was new. So I'm not understanding why there was no one, I guess, watching his performance. It sounds like he had a lot of freedom to make decisions. He had a pretty high position. I wonder how qualified he was. I don't understand like why they were able to just sort of work in a vacuum. It sounds like they weren't going up. They weren't bringing these concerns to the higher levels, and so I'm just not understanding like. Everybody can point the finger saying that, well, I thought they were doing it. Tim Throne can say, I trusted these people that they're doing it, but that doesn't seem to be good enough for someone, especially at that level. A superintendent, that person should, I don't know, just have an outstanding work ethic here. And I just feel like that person was just kind of, cruising at this point. And I don't know, the month of November was really scary for us, just outside of this. Like, the things leading up to it were so obviously worrisome that I don't understand why the school didn't go on a zero tolerance at that point. So, did they ever, like, was that question ever asked? What was their answer? What's their response? Everything was just so, I don't know, just like ignored or pushed down, or like, you know, we've been ridiculed for reporting things. It doesn't, I don't know, I'm so frustrated, and
Well, there should be no ridiculing for reporting. The whole system of threat assessments is set up based on information. More data is better. Take in all the information you can when you try to decide if somebody is doing something that is potentially a threat. Not a threat. Could be a threat. That's why all of the expertise out there talks about a team approach. So you don't have the situation that you had on November 30th, where you have people making these decisions without bringing in the building administrator, Wolf,
yeah.
the school resource officer, Lord. Right? That's why you have a team approach. And we think that's why you have some of the failures you have, because they didn't use the team approach that is called for by their own policy, which references the Secret Service document. And that document is all about team approach. It's all about data. Get as much information as you can, talk to the principal, talk to the school resource officer. And as we say in our report, when you see that math homework, that's it. You talk to the administrator and you get the school resource officer. That's what we're saying in the report.
So, as far as the checks and balances, the board is in charge of the superintendent and but who's in charge of the board?
You.
But we're not. We're not in charge of the board.
I'm not sure.
And they're very rude and unkind. So I don't know. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss for words. Like, I want to cry every day. And I didn't lose a child. But I want to cry every day. Like, just facing these people, and they're just smiling and acting like everything's okay, and it's not okay. We're not okay here. Oxford is not okay. And the community is not supportive. I don't understand. This is like a nightmare. Constant nightmare. I don't know. Thank you. Thank you for doing the report, though. Thank you.
I wasn't intending to speak tonight. However, I did need to use this opportunity to thank you for your report. Note that it brings light to what we knew. And I want to take it to the next level and say that right after the shooting, Karen McDonald, and I'm gonna use this from the article here, she said, "While the shooter was the one that entered the high school and pulled the trigger, there are other individuals who contributed to the events of November 30th. And it is my intention to hold them accountable as well. It's imperative that we prevent this from happening again. No other parent or community should have to live through this nightmare." I watched that day and I watched her say that. And I don't think she was just talking about the shooter and the parents. It changed after that. So my feeling is that you exposed those that were also responsible for the events of that day. And my request would be that Karen McDonald owes this whole community a conversation and the effort of prosecuting those that were responsible for the actions of that day, period. That has to be the case. So I hope that this comes back to be heard, because school shootings are a national crisis. And we do this over and over and over again. And if governmental immunity is what's preventing this from being changed, it's still worth the effort to try. You stand up, you do what's right. Sometimes you go to a game knowing you're going to lose, but you still show up. So she needs to show up for this community and for the parents. And that's all I have to say.
I would just say something on that. We weren't here when decisions were made about who gets prosecuted or the lawsuits about who gets sued. We came in to look at the district and its actions. I have to say about the prosecutor's office, we couldn't have done this report without their file.
Understood. I appreciate them as well, but you know what? It's time to change this cycle. It's time.
Yes.
So this community is owed that. So I hope it gets heard, and I'll say it again, and I didn't want to come up and say it now, but honestly, that's the next level. Like, I watch everybody and I listen to them talk about accountability, and there is no accountability at this point. But this one is so egregious, and that's the word that she used afterward to define what happened on that day. And I assure you, like, it's evident based on your report that it wasn't just the shooter, it wasn't just the parents. It's our responsibility as a school district to take care of our students. As a parent, when you drop your child off anywhere, you expect that that person that's going to be taking care of or overseeing your child is going to protect them. And it was very clear that they did not. So that's the expectation, that's what needs to change. So if we want to talk about the United States and school shootings, you change. And that's part of it.
We hope that happens from this report.
I do too.
Hi, my name is Sandy Olheiser. My son was a junior that day, and my niece was the girl with Phoebe and Eli in the hallway. First, I want to thank you for your report. The first time in 2 years, we know what happened in entirety. We can build timelines. We can fill in a lot of holes. Our question is, what's next? What can we do with this information to make a change going forward in our own school district, in other school districts? What can we do with this?
It's a great question. As our last report reflects the major changes that have happened at Oxford as it relates to threat assessments. I think that's a good news story. I think, if anything, it's gone even beyond where the basic, your typical district is. I mean, they've gone above and beyond it on threat assessments. And so they need to look at that and make sure it's sustainable, that you can keep doing that level of threat assessment in this district. So changes have been made here. I think the big point we want to make about this report is you can only go so far with physical security measures, whether it's metal detectors or gun detectors, cameras, locks. The future is in threat assessments. And that's getting to this before it happens. And the Secret spends, I've talked to people about this, the Secret Service spends a lot of time and a lot of money trying to figure out who the bad guys are before they try to assassinate someone. And it's a tough business, trying to figure out who's going to be a criminal, who's going to be a school shooter. But the signs are there, and the data is there. And if you read the Secret Service literature, they talk about who these school shooters are, why they do what they do, what signals they give out along the way. And we hope that this report continues to sound the alarm bell about having threat assessment, proper threat assessment policies and guidelines in place at districts not only here in Oxford, but Michigan and around the country. There's no excuse, it's out there. You need to bring it into your district, and you need to follow it, you need to train on it. And if you do that, you have the team approach that involves mental health professionals, teachers, counselors, deans of students, principals, assistant principals. If you follow the team approach, it works. I'm not saying it's going to stop all school shootings, but the goal is to minimize the risk of a school shooting. And I think our report contains a blueprint for doing that.
Will this report be given to other districts so that they can look at that and try to implement that in their districts as well?
Well, it's public right now, and to the extent there's anything that we can do to get other districts to read it and act on it, we hope they will. But I think there's a big movement out there from the Secret Service and other agencies and mental health professionals. Let's focus on threat assessments. I get it, physical security is important. Emergency planning that day saved lives. They trained on Alice, the shooting started, the kids either evacuated or they locked down. And those locks on those doors worked. So there is a place for that kind of stuff. But, you know, the future is on the front side, not on the back end. Do the threat assessments, look for these concerning behaviors, and act on them. These kids are crying out for help. Let's find out who they are, and let's do it.
Is there anything as a community that we can do to help push that along?
Yeah, I think you can keep talking about it and keep talking about it with not only board folks but elected officials that, you know, there's a place for the state and the federal government and local governments to give the schools the tools they need, in a lot of cases the money they need for these threat assessment. There's a ton of money out there for hardening schools. Cameras are expensive. Locks are expensive. The money's there for that. Let's find the money for this.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, thanks a lot. Thanks for the report. It was a lot more transparent than I thought since you were hired by the board to present it, and I just think the board has been anything but transparent from the get-go. I don't know if this was answered before. I started trying to listen to some of the questions in the earlier sessions, but will you be amending this report at all based on feedback provided from the Q&A sessions today? Especially around, I think, overall, it was a great timeline. It puts everything we've been saying and asking for and what we've known in a formal document, which is appreciated. And hopefully, a lot of other schools will be using this as a blueprint, as you said, districts and out of state, nationally as well. But I think there are things that possibly could be added to. I mean, I know you've already updated it for some editing, formatting, things like that. But things such as, like, the failure to have the EOP done, or the parent who somehow was able to get into the school where the police and the EMS were not. I think that's important. I think Rourke, who signed up for the threat assessment training in 2018, never had it. Where was the follow-up? What was the follow-up? Why wasn't he ever rescheduled to have another session? And why did that not take place? I mean, just another failure in the system to document. Also, and this kind of talks a little bit about the culture. And I don't know if you've thought, or if it was just too broad of a topic, looking at the culture at Oxford as part of the problem. Mark Fulman, who wrote Trigger Points, he offered help to the school, and they turned him down. So it's just another thing of it, Oxford being so insular, not taking the support that's offered by very well-known people that are specialists in this area, they're thought leaders. They just think they can do it better on their own. So it's kind of a two-part question, but the short one is, would you be amending the report to continue to improve it, to help not just our district, but other districts as well, as new information might come forward, things that, just spark a topic today, and then also the cultural aspect as well?
So the first part about amending it, we absolutely will take everything we heard today, and we'll talk about it, and we'll look at the report and see, if there are gaps in what we did. We have a client. The client is the board. And so, we've got to discuss this with the board to see what they want in terms of the report. But I assure you we'll consider everything that was said here today, and we'll talk to the board about it. But I'm not sure what's going to happen there. On the second piece, the culture, it was somewhat of a discrete assignment.
It was, sorry?
Discrete, and meaning, look at the district, and when by district we mean the board, the superintendent, the cabinet, the high school, administrators, and then the staff. Teachers, we talk about all of that in the report. What were their interactions with the shooter before the shooting? What did they do about those interactions? What happened on the day of the shooting? Did people follow policies and procedures that they agreed to? So when I say discrete, I mean that is what we were looking at. You talked about the parent coming in. We considered that, and we didn't address it. We made a command decision. We weren't going to get into a parent coming into the shooting in the middle of it, looking for their child.
Were you able to talk to him, or was he one of the ones that didn't speak? Or?
No, we didn't. That wasn't, we just, I suppose one could say that, a parent coming in the middle of a shooting is something that needs to be considered by somebody, but we weren't going to look at that. You had a father looking for, I believe, his daughter in the middle of a shooting, how he got into the building, and
Your scope wasn't the police and the first response. Mm-hmm.
So let me talk about that for a second. So the only first responder we looked at was the SRO because he's connected to the school. He fully cooperated with us. He sat for an interview. I think he was deposed. The sheriff's office they cooperated with us. They gave us his GPS for his car. So we had full cooperation from the prosecutor and the sheriff's office. we ended it at that. We did look at the first responders because, as we say in our report, we had several school officials trying to get first responders to come to them. Why those first responders did what they didn't, we weren't out there with them that day. We were not the ones that were asked to run into a school with an active shooter. How fast do you get in there? Where do you go first? When do you let EMS in? That wasn't part of our charge because we weren't hired by Oakland County or the state of Michigan to do that. So we didn't look at any of that. But we put the timeline in there, and for folks can look into that, or those agencies can educate the community on that. I'm glad you asked that because we got some questions from some people that couldn't be here today about EMS and about the first responders and their actions that day and where they went, when they did it, all clear, securing victim scenes, things like that. That's for them to talk about. But Deputy Lewert fully cooperated with us. We explained exactly what he did, where he was that day. He was where he said he was. He raced back as he said he did. We saw the speed on the car. All of that's in there. And we lay out in detail when he arrived what he did, when he went in what he did. So, that's not part of our scope.
Yeah, I just think the culture is an interesting piece, and I think it's probably hard to put into a report because it gets into emotions and things like that too. But the school board at the time of the shooting was a very insular board. You've got kind of an old boys network with Tim Throne and everything like that too. And I just think that there is this culture that I'm hoping will change, but I think it's something that also affects why decisions were made prior and leading up to that day too. And it just,
So on the topic of culture, it's a great question. You can kind of get into the culture when people talk to you at different levels. We had some people talk to us, but if you really want to get a full sense of the culture, you need people to talk to you. And culture in and of itself is not something that was part of our scope, but culture as it relates to doing threat assessments, suicide assessments, protecting kids was part of our scope. And I think, it may have been easier to get into that more with more and more people talking to us, but that wasn't the case. I don't want to harp on this too much. We have okay to say. We encourage our kids to talk, right? We want kids, when they see something, to talk to an adult. When they see concerning behavior from another student, they have to overcome. We have to work with them, train them, teach them. Parents have to do this to get them to overcome whatever it is that holds them back from saying to somebody, I saw ammunition today, or I saw this, and saw that. So you have that program, but it really kind of gets back to parents talking to their kids about, it's okay to talk to an adult. Talk to me as your parent. I'll figure out what to do with the information. So about culture, culture is about speaking, cooperating, talking, encouraging our kids to do the same. That should be the culture.
the last question I have, I just would like to ask your professional opinion on whether you think you thought it was appropriate, and to this day I think it's still going on, to retain the staff involved, versus putting them on leave pending an investigation, even handing out promotions. And if it was appropriate to have them engaged on the mental health committees, the November 30th memorial discussions, and working with high-risk kids now while there's this investigation going on. That to me, I have had a really hard time wrapping my head around that.
We don't make recommendations as it relates to personnel. We leave that to the district to do. On the issue of personnel, it's a really difficult question because you have people that made decisions before the shooting, but then you have people that did things that were pretty heroic during the shooting. That's some tough stuff to deal with. You have people that made decisions before the shooting that were right or wrong, and then you have those same people after the shooting having to live with what happened during the shooting. So I think the district takes all that into consideration when they decide their personnel.
Well, thank you again for the report. Still going through it, and we'll be going through it many more times.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Olivia Upham. I was an Oxford alumna. I taught at the middle school in 2021, and my brother Keegan survived the shooting. So, my question is, in the months prior to the shooting, the Department of Homeland Security and MSP alerted schools, specifically Wolf and Throne, we do have those emails on hand, about the increased potential for school violence, and our district obviously did not take these precautions to heart. I didn't see this information in the report. Did you know about this, and if so, why was it not included in the report?
So we did know about this. I think I know what you're talking about. I remember the document that reflects Homeland Security pushing. I don't know that I recall the document that specifically shows they received it. If you're saying that exists, then
Correct.
it does exist. But I know there was Homeland Security alerts about, you know, especially coming back from COVID, that we have to be on the lookout for mental health. Look, we asked these questions of the superintendent, the principal, and school officials thought they were doing all that they were supposed to be doing to keep kids safe. They thought they were doing the threat assessment process the right way. And obviously, we explore that in our report about what we think about that. But this isn't a case of people saying, yeah, we knew we were supposed to be doing that, we didn't do it. We have people that are saying, we were doing threat assessments, we were doing suicide assessments, we were doing what we thought we were supposed to be doing. And again, you didn't have that check on, well, if this is what you're doing, look at the policy, and this is what you're supposed to be doing. Look at the Secret Service document. That tells you what you should be doing. And on the suicide assessment stuff, and do you have a policy on that? Those kind of checks and balances from the top to the bottom is what we saw a failure in, and not a situation where people were saying, we screwed up, we weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing. They're saying they did things, and they were doing things. Like at the high school level, they were doing these behavioral flow chart things, they were doing these huddle ups, but they say they were doing threat assessments and we just didn't see it. You have to be consistent with your policies and guidelines and have them. If you represent to the community that these things exist and this is how you're going to run your district, well, run your district that way.
Thank you.
Sure.
Just a quick follow-up. You said that Throne was cooperative with the investigation. Did you ask him about this email that was sent to him in June of 2021?
And remind me again what the email says?
The email was directly from the Department of Homeland Security and MSP alerting schools about an increased risk or increased threat to school violence.
I know I did that interview, and I know I asked Mr. Throne about whether it was the email or just generally that DHS had issued this kind of information, and I think the answer was, and I don't want to be held to it, that I think I was generally aware of that, but I don't recall specifically that alert or that email. But, I was generally aware that we need to be concerned about students' mental health and safety. But I don't have the witness statement in front of me.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Corey McCarthy. I have a couple of questions. My first one is going to be that we stated the father that ran into the school on the 30th. You guys deemed that insignificant, and that's why it's not in the report. Is there anything else that was insignificant, not included in the report, that we felt was something maybe that we would have liked to have known, but you thought we didn't need to know?
No, I don't think it was insignificant. If I used that word, that's not the word I meant. I think the word is, we looked at what our scope was, the district and its actions as it related to the shooter, the district and its actions as it related to what their training and security was in place before the shooting, and did they follow it. So there were probably things that came up, and we constantly were evaluating, is this within our scope? First responders, EMS, and so I'm sure there were things. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. We did not leave anything out that we thought would be embarrassing to the district. We didn't put anything in we thought would be helpful to the families. We didn't put stuff in that we thought would be helpful to the prosecutor. We put things in that we as professionals who have done lots of investigations thought was appropriate given the scope. And so that's what's in the report.
You stated that you had a hard time with teachers and that you guys were there and it was discreet to kind of check out what was going on within the schools. Were you able to be aware of the bullying that was going on between the administration and the staff? How some of the administrators would say their trauma was greater than what the staff had went through, or that they were not allowed to speak to you? They weren't allowed to speak to their students or comfort them in any way. Were you able to get a sense of that while you were there
When you say there,
in the high school?
we walked the high school. We didn't interview. I mean, I think we interviewed at least one board member there, but we didn't. Maybe we did some teacher interviews there. I did interview Tom D'Alessandro or Dan D'Alessandro in the boardroom of the high school. But when we were at the high school, we were walking it, trying to understand from the video what was what. As it relates to interviews, we have in our report, I think, something that talks about how teachers were treated after the fact, and some were.
It was still going on in November.
But you were.
Yeah.
I think we talk about that there. We talk about the response of the district, the board, and the superintendent after the shooting happened, what they said to the public. But more importantly, we put in, not more importantly, but just as important, to what the families and the community had to say about what the district did after the shooting, how they acted, what they said. And that's all in there. But, on the bullying thing, we were focused on, when it comes to bullying, was there anything about bullying going on with the shooter, anything bullying other kids that related to the shooting and threat assessments for this specific incident, not bullying generally. One of the things we talked about, I'm sorry, just to finish.
Okay.
One of the things we talked about on bullying was how it relates to threat assessments, whether the person being bullied or the person doing the bullying, how that might move into a threat assessment phase. Maybe it doesn't start out that way because the bullying doesn't appear to be the kind of threat that you would do a threat assessment where you get the team together. But it could get there for either the person doing the bullying or the person being bullied. That could turn into a threat assessment. So that's one way we looked at bullying, and I think we talk about that in the report as well. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, my point was that it would lead to staff not feeling comfortable with their superiors and the administration to maybe do the report, not feeling that they're competent enough to maybe do their jobs when they're talked down upon.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking for reasons for people who weren't talking. There were different reasons, and you can be sure if people didn't want to talk to us because, they were traumatized, and I just can't, we were very respectful of that. We were trying to be trauma-informed about our work. But we just had no response. We had nothing relevant to say in some cases where these folks were on the hallway where the shooting happened, and we just wanted to know, what'd you hear, what'd you see? Did security work? Did the bells and whistles work? Did the cameras work? Did the PA system, did you hear all that? We thought that was relevant to our report to tell you if that stuff worked. Folks who taught the shooter back, we thought that was important. What did you see? What did you hear in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade? And, so we might get responsive, we have no relevant information. Okay. But, we wanted to explore all of that with people. We were trying to be fair about it. We weren't trying to get anybody prosecuted or to get anybody sued into a lawsuit. And I can understand how some people would think that. I can understand how lawyers might tell their clients that. But, I feel like we were sensitive to the trauma of teachers and others that were there that day or had interactions with the student, but understanding that we had a job to do. We were asked, being paid to, get answers where we failed or where we did the job the right way. The board voted on this. They asked us to do this. And so we tried to do it given the limitations we had on witnesses who would talk to us or they didn't. So we tried to find that balance. It was hard to do. And I'm not trying to throw blame out on anybody. We make it clear in the report that the shooter shot these kids and the parents are going to be tried for what they did. Our job was to look at the district. And did they follow their own policies and guidelines? And they do what they promised the community they would do. That was our focus.
My other thing is, earlier you stated that us as parents, we should talk to our children to report things, right? When they see things, say something. So the whole month of November, children were talking to us. We were calling the school. We were reporting to OK to Say. The school was telling our children that they needed to stop spreading rumors. They needed to shut up, leading to the 30th. So it's 572 pages. I skimmed it. I did the best that I could. It's a lot. But was that covered in your report, that the administration told our kids to knock it off when they were telling them every day leading up to the 30th that something was going to happen?
Yeah, so talking about balance, we find a district that's dealing with all of these, this input from the community about what's going on here. We're hearing about a deer head and a countdown, and then there's the bird head. So you have the district dealing with that. And then, you have your district dealing with trying to keep calm and trying to educate and keep moving forward. So I think we reflected our report. They're trying to find the balance between this. So they look into the deer head, and we talk about how they looked into it. They look into the bird head, and we talk about that. And we look into the countdown. And what we say in our report, and this is something I cleared up earlier, we say in our report that we found no connection, well, for certain, we found no connection between the shooter and the kid who did the deer head, the student who did that. There's nothing there.
Right.
I think we said in the report that we found no connection between all of that and the shooting. And I don't think, we didn't mean to say that all of that stuff didn't have an impact on the shooter. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. It wasn't our charge to go find out what caused this kid to become a school shooter. Did that stuff play a role, the deer head and the countdown? We don't know whether it did or it didn't. I think I tried to make a point in here, we didn't see the connections, and I did it
Right.
artfully, but we don't know what the connections are between what he did and those events, but we know there's no connection between the two students. We know that the countdown was investigated and the bird head was investigated, the deer head is investigated. We talked about it, we found it to be a reasonable investigation. We also say later in the report that because the district put out, stop with the rumors, that may have impacted what people were willing to say later on when the shooter was doing all the things he was doing the day before and the day of in school, in class, what he was saying and showing kids. We don't know if it chilled that, but we say in there it could have.
And then lastly, on December 10th, it was reported that not only did Oxford Community Schools fail to take necessary steps to preserve the evidence, but they are willfully destructing the evidence by deleting the web pages and social media accounts. Did you guys investigate that at all to see maybe what they had destroyed, if anything was destroyed?
We worked off of information we were given from the prosecutor's file, and we did talk to the sheriff's office about some of the things you're talking about. And we focused on two specific Instagram accounts because we thought those were important to talk about to the community. The one that was available publicly to anybody who wanted to see it before the shooting, and that is the shooter talking about his new baby, his gun, showing photos of it. That was available before the shooting.
I was talking about Oxford schools deleting evidence.
Which evidence?
I don't know, did they? Did they delete
no.
anything
I
before the
didn't-
investigation, and would
No.
you know?
We didn't see.
What was the source of the quote? Were you reading?
Jeffrey Feiger stated that in like the Detroit Free Press or something.
No, we found no evidence of Oxford destroying or deleting any evidence, or anybody doing that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not going to repeat what I said in the previous two times, but I do want to kind of expand a little bit more on what I heard. There's some legal standards, malfeasance, nonfeasance, and misfeasance, correct? Those are standards in Michigan for public officials that can be charged with and they can be removed from office. So misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance. Nonfeasance is failing to do a job you were obligated to do, correct? That you were sworn to do, or by obligation of your position or title, correct?
I mean,
Well, you're investigators,
We're
you
not
do
getting
the
into
thing, so
legal
I'm just saying,
standards, yeah.
was there malfeasance?
What we found is in the report. Whether you
Pardon?
call it, whatever you want to call it, what we put in the report, you can call it what you want, but it's in the report.
Well, if you're doing a
Not
report,
characterized.
that's what I'm saying, I think that word should be used that are important. There's certainly, you use the word like omission. The word omission is, what, nonfeasance? If they were
Use
required to do...
omission means something that didn't happen.
Yeah, well, you said, yeah, omission, that means, well, failing to do what you're supposed to do is, right?
I understand.
Non-feasance. I'm just saying, but the problem I have is you said that, Tim Throne said that he thought he was doing his job. And I can't just...
said he was doing his job.
Right, that's what he said. Do you believe it?
Well, we have what was going on, so I put that in the report. Tim Throne says we were doing threat assessments. It was being carried out at the high school.
Did you ask him to show you the document and procedure or policy, right? Because they have the district has the board policies, and then they have the procedures and administrative manuals that the superintendent is supposed to make those happen with.
We asked the
right.
district for all proof they had of any threat assessments that were being.
Right, but he said he was doing it, and I'm saying, as an investigator, you don't stop with that. You say, what were you doing? What document were you implementing? What document was he implementing? Which administrative procedure was he implementing?
His position is that.
No, did you ask him?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, what did he say?
We were following what the district's policies and guidelines.
And did you ask him what policy, and he just wouldn't answer?
We showed policies and we showed guidelines and said, work us through all this. And
Right, and
yes,
so
the answer is yes.
8400 policy 8000 administrative manual that says that he has to be notified, principal has to be
I
notified.
showed him those policies.
Right. And he still contended after that, even though he didn't do it, that he did it?
He contends that what was going on in the district is consistent with those policies.
Okay. Did Mr. Throne sign the EOP?
We did not receive a copy of the EOP with any signature.
Okay, so you took an administrator's word that they followed a policy without actually looking at the policy and see if he signed it. So if I said that he signed the EOP, he signed it, he would have to. How about the school board president? Did they sign the EOP? If I would say that they would have to.
So the copy of the EOP that we reviewed in November 2019
Right.
was a blank copy that had.
And you stopped there? You took someone's word for it, that they said they followed it.
I
But-
believe, Andy, we put a request in for that documentation with signatures, and there's none.
Huh?
We, as Guidepost, as part of the investigation, requested for signed copies of the EOP and
Right.
did not receive it.
Right, so you took people's word for it, and you don't know if he signed it or not, and you're saying, well, he did it. If he signed the document, and if Jill signed the document, and Sam Barna signed the document, and the sheriff's office signed the document, and the document tells them what they're supposed to do, and it tells them that they're supposed to have training, and that they're supposed to train the staff in it, and that everyone is supposed to know about all their policies, and they're supposed to implement those policies through the board policies and the administrative manuals and guidelines. And if it says they have to do all that in the EOP, and you sign your name agreeing to it, shouldn't that be in the report the community's getting, that they signed their name to it? So when he's claiming he did it, and you pull out the EOP and you say, did you do this? Did you have tabletop exercises? No? What trainings have you had for threat assessment for the year? It says you have to have a threat assessment team and you have to meet regularly. Who's your team members? Where's your meeting minutes for your, can you explain that to me? Oh, you didn't do that. Who else's name is signed on there? I mean, I don't know about the rest of the community, but if they have their name signed on the document, shouldn't we know?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And it should be in this report. And so if they're not providing it to you, they're obstructing.
More of this.
Okay? Does anyone disagree with me? They're obstructing by not providing that signed copy.
The report does state very clearly that we did not have signed copies and that we did not get those copies provided to us.
That's obstructing, isn't it? You said that they weren't obstructing.
If those signed copies exist.
Okay, that's obstructing. It's like your definition. You're talking to us like we're third graders or less, but I'm an adult, and I expect facts to be checked. And I expect that you have signed copies from an administrator and people who are responsible for a federal and state mandated safety document that has their name signed on it, that what they're supposed to do. And then I'd be asking them, did you do it? And prove to me you did. So we've got this, document that has no teeth. You say, yeah, they didn't do their job. It's worse than that.
Yeah.
They were sworn to do a job. They signed their name to it. They were supposed to update it. They didn't do the update it. And, I have memorandums from the state. They keep talking about that email. I keep showing you, I've got the email. I've been here all day. Nobody's asked me for this. Why? I got it. I also got the email here, July 1st, 2021, between the Department of Justice and the BJA about all these grants and the funding. And here, in Jill's own words, COVID threat has caused all these problems. People are escalating. Violence is happening at schools, and we need to stop it. We need threat assessment. We need to do threat assessments. We want money for threat assessments so we can do a better job. So she knows there's the EOP. Tim Cerrone knows. Tim Barner knows. All these people who have signatures on it, they know there is. And here's their own words just before the shooting. When they're asking for money to do a better threat assessment team. They asked for money when they did their 2019 EOP. They got their money and they put it on the shelf. Now it comes time for renewal, and they're like, hey, let's get some more money. And we'll put that on the shelf. I got the email. It's right here. All her words. February 2022, after her shooting. A reminder from the state of Michigan and Department of Education, Office of School Safety, Michigan State Police. Your EOP reviews are overdue. They're overdue. With the tragic event in our state, meaning Oxford, it's clear that these plans are critical for schools to have in place, as outlined in, and then it gives the law and the citations and everything that was supposed to be in the EOP. Threats, school violence, how to train teachers, how to identify threats, vulnerability assessments. I have these documents going all the way from 2015 from the state. And I have, and the others talk to it, I have the emails from the State Department of Education, Office of School Safety, to Throne, to Jill, to Sam, to all these people, board members, that the EOP updates do. You're supposed to be following it. You're supposed to be training. Here's free training. Here's free resources. And they didn't do it.
Good example of an amendment opportunity.
Pardon?
Good example of an amendment opportunity.
Yeah,
Right.
update the
Right, so that's what I'm saying. So here, Oxford Community Schools got $442,000 in grant money for our EOP and to set up threat assessment teams.
What did they do with it?
Obviously not what they were supposed to, right? They applied for other grant funding. Again, here they're trying to find more grant funding to set up threat assessment teams to do a better job. There's no question they knew. They were talking about it. They were using the words threat assessment teams, behavioral threat assessments. Safety drills and documentation. Here's from Michigan State Police that went out to all the schools. You need to be your safety drills, your reporting. You have a deadline for the emergency operations plan review. It has to have all these things in it. Dear school administrators, right? All of this is before the shooting. And I'm seeing a report that says, well, they said they did it. I don't mean to be so confrontational here, but I'm offended that it's not in there. And if it's because they blocked you, don't tell me they weren't obstructing you if that wasn't provided to you. Why do you think they didn't give you their signature pages? I think the silence speaks for that, right? That's pretty clear. Not a single bit of training, no tabletop exercises. None of the stuff that they were supposed to do was done. That's why the staff didn't know. They had policy. You kept saying there wasn't, these policies for threat assessment. There was. It's right in the EOP. The EOP says you got to do threat assessment. You have to have a team. Notice to staff members, all the new employees are supposed to get it. It says right here they're supposed to know about the EOP and be trained for it. And it's not a list of 30 or 40 things like you're saying. It's a very simple list. That's in here. So they were supposed to know. Teachers are supposed to be using this form when they have suspensions or when they pull a kid out of class. Were any of these forms used?
We talk about it in that report.
Right. You got your policy 8000. That's your administrative guide that we're talking about. Identifying, responding to imminent warning signs. That's what I talked about earlier. Threats, right? Kids that are posing unusual behaviors. That policy's been in effect since 2011. All these policies are in here. And I'm going to reiterate one more time that the operations manual, the safety information for the school that was adopted in 2004 and amended in June of 2021. The third page in big bold print. Threat assessment. Threat assessment. But I keep hearing you say there wasn't a threat assessment policy. It's right here.
We talk about that in our report.
Right. Yeah. This was in front of them. It talks about them needing to do threat assessment. It says that doing threat assessment prevents things from happening. Trained threat assessment teams need to be done. The teams, here's their policy, will meet annually. Will.
Talk about that in our report.
They didn't. Determining the nature and extent of the communication that would trigger a threat has to be in there. Stating when people have to be notified. Board members, volunteers, and other school community members, including students and parents, shall immediately report to the superintendent or principal any expression of intent to harm another person or statements or behaviors that are concerning. It's their policy. And they didn't do it. So I keep hearing they didn't have a policy. They did. They did. And the most guiding policy is the one they signed. And the one they took money for. That they didn't do. And so I'm going to ask you once again, update your report. Put in the fact that they were required to update the EOP, they didn't. That they were required to train under it, and they didn't. That they were required to do tabletop exercises, and they didn't. That they were required to do a threat assessment team, and who was supposed to be on it, and they didn't. That they were supposed to meet regularly, and they didn't. They were supposed to update the board, and they didn't. Put that out there.
It is in the report.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a question. I haven't had the full chance to skim through the 600 pages. Those are my weekend plans, but I just want to know if you guys have evidence and proof of Hopkins and EJAC actually being on leave and not in the building. And if so, why is there eyewitness accounts of Hopkins being in the building after the shooting, wearing a badge saying #1 counselor as his name on the lawsuit because he thought it was funny. I just wonder if you guys just have any of that in the report, or if you're planning to add to that or find the evidence that they were on leave.
So can we back up a second so I better understand your question? Your question is, did we find evidence that Hopkins and EJAC were never in the building that day?
That they were on leave after the shooting.
They were on leave after the shooting.
Like the school said they were. Yes, we were told that they were put on leave, but we have there is staff eyewitness accounts of them being in the building when they were supposed to be on leave.
No, we don't have anything on that. Whether what they did, what action they took or didn't take against Hopkins and EJAC after the shooting, we don't have that. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be important though?
Well, what was important to us was, for the first report, what are they doing today? Today, meaning when we issued the report. What were they doing for threat assessments? What were they doing for physical security? And we reported that to the public, so that was out there. For this report, it was about what happened before the shooting, who interacted with the shooter, what kind of threat assessment they did or they didn't do, a suicide assessment they did or they didn't do, and then when the shooting happened, what did school personnel do during the shooting? And then we looked at the board's response, what they said to the community after the shooting, what the district did in terms of statements that they made, and what the response was of the families and the communities to those things that happened. But we don't have anything on whether Hopkins was suspended or not, or whether EJAC was suspended or not.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We didn't get any other questions other than the ones I talked about during this meeting. There were some from prior meetings. I think we covered all that tonight, but happy to answer any other questions you might have before we stop tonight. Yeah.
I didn't see anything in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was there anything about why the board declined the Attorney General's offer for a free independent investigation?
I don't have that information. That would be something you'd have to ask the board about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you, in your opinion, would it differ at all, an Attorney General investigation versus your investigation?
My understanding is, again, you could ask the Attorney General what their power is to do this, but the only thing I could see is if somebody had the power to compel people to speak. We didn't have that power. I don't know if the Attorney General had that power or not.
We don't believe they have that power in this circumstance without it being a civil case or a criminal case. And there's a footnote in the report that addresses that.
Yeah, and she indicated that it would not, she wouldn't be able to force either. I'm just wondering from a purely a fiscal standpoint, with the money spent on this investigation versus when it was offered for free from the Attorney General. It just wonders why that offer was declined.
Yeah, that's for the board. Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I just have one last question. I'm just wondering if we can know how much the grand total Oxford Community Schools spent on this 2-year investigation?
I think you can know that from the board.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I'm just going to go real quick. I'm going to go real quick just because I know Alyssa Slotkin's got some people here and some legislators might be watching and things, and I wanted to explain to you guys, you know, we have the county sends people to come in and inspect all the kitchens in our schools twice a year. So they bring their own thermometers in and they check all the temperatures on things, and they check our records, and they check our training, and they say, are you doing what you say you're doing? We're not going to trust you. We're gonna check it ourselves. So I wholeheartedly believe this has become a serious enough problem, and if you're interviewed about this and your team's interviewed about this, as much as people don't like the government and don't want the government in their lives, we need some oversight, I feel, on this piece of preventing these acts of targeted violence in schools. So we need someone at the county level or something that comes in, hey Novi, you know, hey Farmington, hey Ferndale, hey Oxford, are you guys doing what you're supposed to be doing? Show us. We're gonna come in for a day. We're gonna pretend to be a troubled student, and we want you to show us what you do. I mean, that's just me as a mom. That would make me feel better, knowing that someone was checking on this stuff, because otherwise you're just trusting them. And they're nice, these are all nice people that love kids and I assume are doing the best they can, but maybe they need oversight, maybe they need tools, maybe they need help, maybe they need training, mandated training. So that's just an idea.
I do think school districts need help in this space, the threat assessment space. It's not an easy space, right? We're talking about trying to identify kids who are at risk of doing something really bad. How do you figure out who those kids are?
Right.
And there's that balance of stigmatizing kids, but also protecting the rest of the kids in the school. So I think districts need help finding that balance. And there are regulators that look at, you know, what you're going to do, what your fire drill stuff is, and what are you going to do in a hurricane, and all these other things. But I think on the front side of this problem, the threat assessment versus the physical security side, I think that's where the future is. So I think regulators can give schools help in this space, whether it's requiring them and coming in to checking that they do have threat assessments in place. You need to have it.
And you practice it, just like you practice.
You train on it.
Right. Yeah, thanks.
What is the purpose of the next meeting that you have scheduled?
Next one we have scheduled?
Yeah.
We don't have anything scheduled right now. We're going to see what the board wants to do in terms of how they want us to continue to respond to the community.
So there's not another listening?
Nothing scheduled right now,
okay.
But if something's needed and the board wants us to do it, we'll do it.
You'll do whatever
Yeah,
they want. Okay.
sure.
All right. Well, my heart goes out to all the kids in our community because they're the ones that are really suffering. And, you know, as bad as this is for the adults, it's 1,000 times worse for our children. So thank you to everybody who showed up to all 3 meetings today. I'd like to see everybody at the board meetings. If you're a teacher, if you're a student, if you're a parent, we need your help at the board meetings to hold these people accountable. And now that we all know the truth, that so many of us have been trying to speak up and being pushed down by the board members. I remember Buck Muir came to the board meeting and he was going to address the board after his son was murdered. And you know what they did before he spoke? They reduced his time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. And they've just really they've gone out of their way to show as much disrespect. And as far as I'm concerned, the administration and the people that are lying to us about how these children died that day and how all this community became victims, they are our enemy. And now they are open, and we know what they did and what they didn't do. And people like Tim Throne, you know what? Gross negligence. That Wolf didn't know what was happening in his own building with his own counselors. Gross negligence. If he's in charge, he should know what's happening. Well, I didn't know. Well, that's no excuse. You're the boss. You're supposed to know. And his letters to the community, Throne and Wolf, telling us all to shut up when we had serious concerns, obviously, you know, like, it's unacceptable. And I really hope that prosecutors get involved, because I don't know about you, but for me as a community member, I'm not going anywhere. I don't accept this. Our children are watching us, and we're going to stay here until we have justice. And we appreciate you for cracking the egg open for this community, but there's much, much more. And I hope you amend the document to include some of the concerns that were mentioned today. And the board was put in place by us. So, you know, you may be dealing with the board, but ultimately you're working on our tax dollars. So we're actually paying the bill for this.
We're in charge of them, right?
Well, if we're not in charge of them, maybe it's time to put a chain on a collar on them and a leash and walk them out the door, because how long are we going to tolerate this as a community? And I know this isn't your problem, but there's lots of people listening right now, and it's time for our community to stand up for our children. And if we're not going to stand up for our children and protect them from school administrators and people that have been lying to us and breaking our trust, then what else important do we really have to do? Go make more money? Go get another car? More houses? What do we need more of that's more important than protecting our children? So I'm asking the community, if you're listening, please show up at the next board meeting. And for the people protecting the board members and their gross negligence, you know, maybe you should put the children above your friendship with another adult. I don't know what the deal is, but I'm proud of everybody who came out here and all the questions and the people that have been standing up for 2 years to get this public. So thank you for your work.
Student asked about Hopkins. We do have something in our report about that. There's so much in here. Counselor Sean Hopkins asked to be placed on paid, non-disciplinary, non-duty administrative leave, and this request was granted December 7, 2021. In a letter to Hopkins, the district's human resources leader explained that placing Hopkins on leave was the best course of action, that he would be notified upon the conclusion of the investigation. Dean of Students, Nick Ejak, was ultimately placed on paid, non-disciplinary, non-duty administrative leave as well. That's all that's not something we looked into. No.
We're aware of that report that you mentioned. We're aware of that. We were unable to gather a lot of information about that, including the time, the date that folks said that they saw that. We weren't able to pull together a lot of details on that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you very much.